Hello and a warm welcome to another episode of Legally Speaking, a fireside chat presented by Kochhar Company, Mumbai. My name is Raj Chakrabarti. I am a senior partner with the firm. And today we are going to discuss about an industry which affects each one of us on a daily basis in numerous ways. Now think about your day-to-day life. You are sitting in your office or on your way to office, your investment advisor informs you that there is a hot stock to be picked up. You immediately use your smartphone and do some transaction. You intend to watch a special movie on Netflix over the weekend with your spouse. You make a note of that and you actually enjoy the movie over the weekend. Your kid wants to go out and have fun with his friends from college or school, as the case may be, and he goes out and pays through the UPI whatever purchases, etc., that he or she does. Now, what's the common factor? The common factor is possibly that three very unrelated instances where the data is possibly getting captured, getting housed at some data center which is in Mumbai, in your city. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that is the topic that we are going to talk about today, which is the data center industry in India and the path ahead. To discuss all these issues with us today, we have a very distinguished guest with us who is an industry expert. So I'm very pleased to present to you Mr. Jayant Thakur, who is a senior legal director and general counsel of NTT Global Data Centers India. Little bit about Jayant. Jayant is a professional with over 18 years of experience who specializes in litigation, arbitration, compliance, and international transactions. He has concluded transactions in different countries in the Asia Pacific region. He regularly advises his management in his present role on complex compliance issues, transactions, and other related matters. A very warm welcome to you, Jayant.
Thanks, Raj, and pleasure being here. Thank you so much.
It's our pleasure, Jayant. And before we proceed, I must also mention another personal thing about Jayant. He is a proud father of a 7-year-old, and his spouse is also a lawyer, but I understand she's primarily now taking care of the family and the child.
Yeah. Thanks, Raj.
So, Jayant, before we begin, I have some interesting statistics with me, which reads something like this: that the Indian data center business in last 5 years or so has witnessed $14 billion in terms of investment. Now, this is likely to exceed $23 billion by 2025. If you look at Avendas Capital's projections, that there is a likely growth of 40% CAGR by way of real estate investments for data center industry. Currently, if you look at it, the projection for 2027 is that the market size would become almost $10 billion, which is again a CAGR of 5.84%. Capacity expansion is another area which is huge, something projected to be by the end of this year 1,300 megawatts. We have over or maybe close to 150 data centers now in the country, Jayant, roughly about that figure.
Yeah.
So, my first and obvious question is, what is driving this growth in India? What, in your view, is causing this?
Thanks. So, to begin with, I'll first clarify that I'm here in my personal capacity. And whatever I'm saying is, purely in my personal capacity and I'm not representing NTT,
Sure.
as such.
Sure.
I think what you said in the beginning and the way you explained in terms of various facets of our life and how what is common in all of that is data center.
Right.
So that reminded me of a long back there was a saying, or Sale used to say there is a little bit of steel in
Correct. I remember that. I remember that.
So similarly, I think in whatever we do, whether it is social networking, whether it is, you kind of doing online transaction, you kind of, posting something, on the LinkedIn, on various social networking site, binge watching or watching your favorite shows. So everything that we do in our day-to-day life is in some way related to the data center. Like if when you are going to a ATM and when you are withdrawing that, putting that number to withdraw some cash, that data also goes from your ATM to some data center somewhere, and then it has to come back. So what is also very important is the time lag has to be bare minimal, right? So it's
Sure.
not, so it has to be the top notch kind of service that you provide, and you have to provide the service no matter what, right? So force majeure, as we know it, does not matter for us, right? Because like, if say, just imagine if you're trying to buy something, and all of a sudden your Paytm or wallet is not working, that will have huge impact, right, on the businesses. Has been there, but why India, right? How data centers are now booming in India. Now, this primarily, there are two reasons. One is, of course, the regulatory requirement which came, whether, like in case of banks, it was RBI that mandated
Sure.
storing of data in India.
Data
Similarly,
localization.
data localization requirement by the industry bodies, like
Sure.
the regulator, like DOT, TRAI, and or RBI or IRDA, right? So because of that, there was a huge push. So that was one, and the other thing is, see, the experience, right? For you to have, so at one point in time, I'm not sure whether you remember or not, if somebody is sending you something, it used to, like the when you are trying to download, it used to be kind of,
Yeah, the buffering.
the buffering, it was never ending, right?
Mm.
And because we, at that point in time, we did not even had the telecom infra, right, which
Okay.
is required,
Correct.
right? So we did not have that. But now, if you look at it, just imagine the kind of, telecom infra which is available today, in cities like Mumbai, in metros, at the price point. One component for data center is your connectivity, right? Because what we are looking at is the connected data centers.
Correct.
So, and that is why all these data centers are called global data centers. So that's the commonality, right? If you look at it. So one is your the backhaul, the network piece, and the other thing is, like, the other thing what is very critical for data center is the power, right? So effectively there are three components. One is you have to have a building. That building has to have the basic infrastructure, and that all that basic infrastructure has to be supported by a huge capacity, right? So the data center are guzzlers in the sense, like, how they use power, right? So you have to have a place which has a good supply of electricity, reliable supply of electricity. You have to have a place which is well connected through, bandwidth, or the telecom network, right? And the land and the building, in terms of the different capacity. If you are coming from Delhi, if you are coming from the other areas, even, Chennai, Bangalore, though the other infrastructures are pretty good, but power cut is very rampant. And in data center, you can't afford power cuts.
The reasons why you feel that there has been a boom, so to speak, in the data center industry.
And that is further aided by, AI and the language models, right? Because the capacity, see, like, a simple example is, if you're doing your day-to-day work, right? When
Right.
you're sending mails, so for all that you need CPU, a normal compute, right?
Sure.
But when you are looking at the large models, right? When you are looking at AI, because AI has to kind of look at a very large model and then do that calculation and come back. So for that you need GPUs, right? Now the way they both work are different, right?
Absolutely.
So therefore, if you look at the data center industry, and the design in the data center industry is also changing because of that. The power need is changing drastically because the GPUs need a lot more power. The heat that they kind of generate is much more than your normal CPUs, right? So all that are the challenges. But yeah, primarily it is driven primarily by the AI ML, cloud, and the various other aspects that we do in our day-to-day life, right? Whether it is taking pictures. Earlier one picture used to be like maybe some KBs. Now one picture is in a GB,
In
right?
a GB,
So
yes.
all that data is residing somewhere at in that sense.
No, sure. This is very interesting, Jayant. But in fact, I have a lot of questions surrounding, some of the pluses that you mentioned, because some would say that those are also in some way challenges.
Yeah,
Like, for
yeah, yeah,
instance, the heat that is generated. There is this talk about the green data center
yeah.
and so on. So obviously, we will come to that in a moment because that's certainly on my list. But touching upon something that you said, that there are obviously Mumbai is probably the national leader when it
Yeah.
comes to the data center business, then followed by probably Chennai, but the gap is quite a lot. Then there are others, areas like Noida,
Bangalore. Yeah, yeah,
Mangalore,
yeah,
and
yeah,
all of that. And in fact, places like Hyderabad
yeah.
and Kolkata, they are also trying to catch up.
Catch up. Yeah.
So my one question is, you already, I think, in some ways answered, because you talked about the availability of power, continuous supply of power. But besides that, what would attract someone who's in the data center business to set up shop or capacity in a new region? Is it only power, or what else would you look at?
Yeah, so I think there are, like from a technical standpoint, there are huge requirements, right?
Mhm.
So Bombay possibly kind of, is doing all the right clicks,
Sure.
right? But I think other places are catching up real fast,
Mm.
and like each place has its own advantage. Like Delhi, because
Mhm.
of the vicinity with the parliament, central government being there,
Sure.
right? Then in Bangalore, because Silicon, it is so called
Silicon.
Silicon Valley. So
Yeah.
obviously, there are a lot of companies who are in that space, and they kind of, whether it is like your Microsoft of the world, or AWS of the world. So all the hyperscalers are also there,
Mhm.
kind of bringing in. And I think largely in terms of where data centers are going, are, in my view, are driven more by where clients want to go, right? You are it's not driven by data center players in that sense, right? It is primarily driven in terms of where the demand is coming, right? So I think one of the reason why you see a much more capacity in Mumbai
Mhm.
is because RBI is in
Mumbai.
in
Mhm.
Mumbai, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
All your, and Mumbai is a financial capital, right? All
Mhm.
your banks and uh, the
Financial
financial
services.
institutions and
Yeah.
services, they're all kind
In
of
Mumbai.
are in
Yeah.
Mumbai. But as I said, there is a huge capacity which is taken by all the hyperscalers, and in a way, the data center companies are driven by them, right? Wherever there is a demand, there will be supplies, right? So
Correct.
I think
Yeah.
that is another area. The other thing is like, see, what I was talking about Mumbai earlier is the general, just to kind of give you a generic feeling, right?
Mm. Mm.
Not going very technical, because as a layman, as a human,
Mm.
when I came from Delhi to Mumbai,
Mhm.
two things hit me. One was the space constraint that we have in Mumbai,
Right.
and the other one was, you don't need to bring your like your UPS,
Those
the
inverters and all.
inverters, because
Yeah.
there's no power cut.
Is absolutely, yeah.
So I think, so from that standpoint. But is it that because if you look at it, you talked about UP, there is a huge emphasis on the data center. They're setting up data center parks in various states,
Right.
and when they are setting up data center in these states, I'm sure everybody is aware that power and
Is the key.
is the key, right? Power
Mm.
and the network.
Mm.
Without that, you can't have a data center, right? So is the key, and obviously I'm sure they'll kind of they'll work on it to ensure that it is made available in that sense.
Absolutely. Touching upon that point about hyperscalers, let me ask you a slightly commercial question. We have seen, the growth of those co-location models, etc., and then you have the players who are not really in the tech sector in the sense, say, your company or others are. Say, for example, the Adanis and the Hiranandanis. They are also jumping into the fray. What explains that?
So I think what explains is, and so one is like, say, for example, Hiranandanis, have been building data centers for a while. So they have been vendors, so to say, like, because when you are building, see, data center at the end of the day is a building,
Right.
right? So first you have to construct a building. After you construct the building, then you have to bring in the MEPs, the equipment that will fit in that building, right? And then you have to have a design wherein you make kind of optimal use of your power,
Sure.
so to kind of where you can use least and get most, right? So that's where your design kind of becomes important. And then heat and cooling again is very important. So humidity level has to be maintained at a certain level. The cooling has to be maintained at the certain level. So I think these are the key elements. And because say Hiranandani has been in the business of building
The infrastructure.
the
So to speak.
infrastructure.
Yeah.
So they think that, and because this is the next big thing in the retail, right? So, and some of the people still consider this to be a main frame, main play of retail, right? Of your land and building.
Sure.
Because you have to have those land and buildings, and they have huge lands. And for data center, you need a decent. Now, initially when it started, we were looking at small. You will see multiple data centers which are in maybe an acre or 2 acres. But now, if you look at the data center how it is built now, you will see more and more players are taking the whole campus. So the campus approach is kind of getting more traction because it's easier, like you have that scale. And that is where I think Hiranandani has an advantage because they have a huge land parcel, land bank.
Yeah.
I think Adani has a very different advantage. Obviously, they also have huge land now. But other than having land, they are already in the business of power.
Correct.
Right. So, and the three component, you need in a data center. One is land and building. The other one is power. The third one is telecom. The telecom connectivity, the network.
Absolutely.
So Adani has two in that, and they are collaborating. They're working with the established player in the data center business. They kind of doing a JV of a sort and working with those players.
Sure.
So obviously that's a competition.
Of
that
course,
will have to.
That's only fair that
Yeah.
you have multiple players. That's beneficial overall for the industry. Now, because you touched upon this point a couple of times, let me jump straight to that about that problem of heating, cooling, etc. Is green data center a reality? Is something being done? What is your thought on
so
that?
I think that's where so it's important. See, like at the end of the day, you just don't want a data center today, right? You want something which is sustainable,
Right.
And if we don't look at it today, then it will not be sustainable, right? So entity as a group has committed that all the data centers that we have across the globe, and we have 140 plus data centers in more than 20 countries. But there is already a commitment that we have done at a global level that we will make sure that all these data centers are using 100% RE by 2030. It's a
Very
humongous
ambitious
and ambitious
plan.
plan.
Yeah.
But we have done that. And why? Because sustainability, that's the core of it. Right?
But in the Indian context, while this is of course very, very interesting and very, I'll say, encouraging to hear an industry leader like NTT committing itself to use of 100% RE. But in the Indian context, do you think we have the scalability of the RE ecosystem here to support your ambitions?
I think that's a big challenge. India, is so we already have a huge capacity that we have worked with Tata Power and other other RE companies in India. But I think there's still with and we are very conscious because of this commitment that we have made. We are very conscious, and each time we are making a data center, we are kind of taking that into account, right? Because this is already a commitment. But I think it's as I said, it's a very ambitious goal that we have set for ourselves. And on sustainability, not just that we will use 100% RE for the global data centers, we are also committing that we'll be net zero by 2040. So NTT as a group has a commitment of net zero at by 2040. Then apart from this commitment, I will also tell you, the what are we doing, right? Like cooling, right? The cooling. So cooling data center is something, one of the most critical elements, right? Because
Right.
the heat generated is
Humongous,
humongous,
yeah.
right? So we have come up with technologies which only we have done so
So
far.
it's like your innovation in
Yeah,
some ways.
it's our innovation. We have worked
Okay.
with like we are working on immersive technologies,
Immersive
so
cooling and all of,
cooling and all
yeah.
that. So that we have done. We have worked with our partner ecosystem, and and then there is also a lot of emphasis, not just by entity, but as a whole by the industry, on chip, cooling at the chip level, right? And then entity, in terms of their focus, is kind of working a lot on the photonics, the photonics network, right? So there is a lot of emphasis which entity does on the research and development, and on being green, like skill, like on being sustainable. So just to give you an idea, right? So each year, the kind of money that we spend on research at an entity group level is close to $3 billion. So
That's
a
huge.
huge
That's huge.
emphasis on
Research,
research.
essentially. Yeah, yeah. Just one question, going back to what you said earlier, that with the growth of AI as we know, AI, data analytics, and whatever you have, they're big data crunchers in that sense. You deal with a huge volume. So your storage capacity, your
Yeah.
overall hardware that you will use will obviously become more voluminous, more complex, and therefore more heat generating. On the other hand, you are working on certain technologies which would lower all those aspects and you'll take care of that part. Now, how do you see the balance being maintained? Because AI is just going to grow
Yeah.
exponentially as we speak, right?
Yeah.
So, I'm going back to the target of by 2030, 100% RE.
So it is committed, like
Hmm.
it is said by our
Hmm.
leaders also, that it's a very ambitious goal, right? But
Sure.
unless you have an ambitious goal,
You don't make
where
progress.
will where will you reach? So it's a very ambitious goal.
Hmm.
But I think the point is that we are not just looking at. So obviously profit is important and
Hmm.
shareholders are important. We are kind of, all of us are kind of working on that. But what we also look at is the stakeholder, right? So
Right.
who all are the stakeholders? So we work with the stakeholders, right? So in this kind of a setup, right? Like say, I'll just give another example, right? We have a data center somewhere in US, and there is a huge scarcity of water there. So
Hmm.
what we have done, the research element that we have done is that data center, and cooling, a lot of cooling is done through water, right? and it's an essential component. But we have worked for that particular data center. We have worked on a technology which effectively does not waste, you know, even bare minimum. Like there's no wastage of water in that sense. So I think so that is what, it's not just it, so different places have different issues, so we are working with the stakeholders there so that we address. So another place what we have done is we are using, so there is a lot of heat generated, and if you are in a cold climate, that heat can be used by somebody.
Utilized.
We are doing all that in our from a sustainability standpoint.
Sure. So, Jayant, I mean, we obviously talked about the good news, what's happening, what's the ambitious plans are of the industry, and so on. But let's talk about the real world challenges. You mentioned three, four attributes which are the key elements of your industry: land, power, telecom, network, and so on. So people would say, of course, we have touched about upon the green energy, the carbon footprint, and all of that. There, that is obviously a natural corollary of the growth of this particular industry. But if you talk about the real world problems which you feel that need to be addressed to further enhance the growth of data center industry in India, what are those and how do we address them?
Yeah, so I think one of the key concerns that like I think most of the data centers players in India kind of facing today. One is around the quality of general contractor, right? So in India, it's very common to kind of to delay, common to have delay in projects, right? Whether it is our house or so, like the buildings get delayed, and the data center, because of the neck break speed in which we are progressing, the expectation that your client will have is that you will deliver them on the day that you kind of agree with them, right? And your GCs will give you a date, and many a times they kind of don't supply, or don't kind of don't deliver in those timelines. And then there are like you will need various approvals mm, after the building is done, whether it is related to fire, OC, all that. So that again is a time consuming activity with little or no control that you can have, right? And without the building being ready, there's nothing that you can do, right? Because
Really
the
do.
data center
Has to be there, has to be
is
housed there.
yeah, right.
But if I can just interject here, Jayant, because you mentioned about the multiple approvals, licenses, etc. But what my understanding is that at least there are in certain regions or locations there are these single window clearances. So are you saying that that's there but not there?
So it's there, like, so
Hmm.
so we are working in the right direction, I would say that,
Hmm.
like, so but there are those practical challenges after you are done with your construction, to kind of get the OC,
Sure.
right?
Hmm.
So that is one. AI, as you rightly said, AI, the design of the data center has changed drastically, right?
Okay.
Then on also on the security side of it, right?
Hmm.
If you look at, because data center houses a very critical, is a very critical infrastructure. And there's a lot of dependency, like, if you're looking at, say, looking at a smart city, right? So a smart city can run only if you have data centers, right? Because
Right.
that will need huge capacity,
Correct.
right?
Hmm.
Now, for that level of support, right, the manpower that, the resources that you need, both in terms of the manpower and or your supply chain, right? So there was a huge capacity issue that all the data centers players faced during COVID,
Hmm.
uh, because like those equipments which which, say like earlier if it was taking 6 months time, it kind of started taking much more. And then because your demand is more, so more and more people are, placing order. So it took even longer
to deliver.
right? And
Yeah.
then, so the weight bearing capacity that is expected in a data center has increased, manyfold. And that is because of the nature of, the servers,
The whole hardware
the
which is
hardware
being
that,
installed. Yeah.
so that is one. Also the, your, because of that, the heat again, has been, it has been multifold. So say like earlier, if you are having a data center with, uh, say 5 feet, 5 meter, now you have to go 6 meters. So, the height of the floors are increasing. So all these are design changes. So your see, like even if you have a data center, if your data center is 10-year-old, is, those data centers you will possibly not be able to use for AI.
So you need a different kind altogether.
A different design altogether. The design itself is very different from what you normally have, in the erstwhile days.
Sure.
So that is the other element. Yeah.
So is this because if I hear you right, so you mentioned about personnel, of course, you mentioned about the GC, etc. But talking about the personnel as an employee, so the skilled workers that you need to manage, run the entire infrastructure, because we in India, we have always prided ourselves as the IT hub of the world and so on and so forth. So are you saying that we are not keeping pace with the data center growth?
So the data center, like, see, I have been with IT for very long. I
Right.
started my career as a, as a litigating lawyer, but very briefly, and then I moved to, I started working with CMC, which was IT company. Then I
Sure.
was with HP, again, Hewlett Packard IT company, Dimension Data entity, all along more or less, ICT. But see, the data center, business is very different.
Okay.
Right. So see, like there are something which are still there. Like, if you look at it, some changes are there in terms of model, right? But some of the changes, like earlier when I was not in data center, I had nothing to do with land,
Right.
right? Building, land building is not IT.
No, that's
Right?
not right. Yeah.
Like in IT companies, normally will not have that kind of, because you need to maintain, servers at a particular temperature, a humidity. So all that has to be looked at, and it is 24 into 7, right? So it's not, so that has to run 24 into 7, irrespective of whether it is, flood, whether it is earthquake, whether, no matter what, right? So in the, even during COVID, right, like people who are working on the critical infrastructure side on the data center, they were coming even during COVID time.
So I think data centers have been recognized
Nice
as
as essential services,
Yes.
right? And given an infrastructure
Given
status in
the
that sense. Yeah,
infrastructure
yeah, yeah,
status,
yeah, yeah.
which I think is the way forward, if you ask me, in terms of the
Yeah.
policy position of the government, right? But coming back to the problem side, another area where what I would want to know is about the power supply. While, of course, Bombay, there is no power cut and all that we know, but isn't it also the case that these are this is something which I think one grievance of the industry could be that the power tariff is something which is quite on the higher side, or it's some areas like you mentioned, it's not readily available, or it's not continuous. So what those challenges are still
See,
there.
power is regulated in India, right? You don't have to talk beyond that, right? It's a
Right.
regulator and it's a state subject,
Sure.
in that sense, right? So each of the different state will have different. So that is where, like there is a lot of focus by governments which are, focusing on the data center side, right? Because if you don't give this, that's a bare basic requirement. Without power, you can't run data center,
Sure.
right? So.
And no concerns about the telecom backbone of that.
So I think telecom, we have our own undersea cable, right? So which connect, so that is called MIST. So Malaysia, India, Singapore, and Thailand, right? So we are, so we are connect. So that, of course, is why our data centers, and it is connected, right, throughout the world. So that is the connected data center piece. And I think India has done reasonably well in the telecom space
in terms of telecom infrastructure as such.
Yeah. So that's what I was saying, a while back, if you remember, the price point at which we are getting the bandwidth, right, at home also, or in offices, is kind of, I think, pretty reasonable by global standards.
Sure. So let's talk about the other aspect, other 2 or 3 key features or key areas of interest so far as data centers are concerned. One, you already touched upon data security, or rather the security aspect of this. So what can you tell us?
Yeah, so I think data center is as secure. I remember you had come to our office once, right?
I remember that experience. And I also remember the comment that I made, that it's like entering the US embassy. Or maybe even more stringent than that.
Yeah. So because it is so, because without that, you can't have a data center, right?
Right.
Now, if you look at some of the data centers, say, like, so there are boom barriers, right? So you will have the best in class security systems in a data center. So you will always have people who know, like we have, ex army person who leads our security.
Sure.
And it's the key, right? Without, so one is the physical security,
Right.
And so physical security, both in terms of your design, right, and or the operations. So it's not just one, both, right? Because you have to design your data center in such a way that even if somebody wants to, say, like, tomorrow somebody wants to attack.
So it's essentially you're talking about a physical breach of your
physical breach,
of your facility.
Yeah. So one is the physical breach of your facility, because say, somebody may want to come and kind of
damage
the data center, blow it off, right? So somebody is trying to bring the car, so there has to be a boom barrier, right? So that boom barrier will not allow that person to come in.
Absolutely.
Right? Then there are checks at multiple level in that. And then, so that's the physical security part. Then there is also a IT security, the security, the network security, the IT security,
data security, and all of
the data security. So we have, top notch security, both physical as well as the network and IT bit, right?
Okay.
Because that, like, see, like the whole world, if the whole world's data is relying on you, and when there is so much of effort to kind of safeguard that data, obviously you have to have the best in class security to kind of, so it's like a warehouse, right? So if something is very, say, gold is very precious, and if you are storing gold, so obviously you have to have that level of security.
Yeah. And you would say that today what you see in India, and I'm not just talking about your company per se, but let's say generally speaking, the data center industry, the standards of security, and by that I mean not just the physical infrastructure security, but data, network, IT, everything. So these are all international class. I mean, this is what is available, say, because USA is the market leader. So it's the same as that in terms of standard?
Yeah, so I think, see, if we look at data security, I think GDPR, Europe being, being the front and center of it, right? Because nothing kind of beats the kind of standards that is there in with GDPR. So I think from that standpoint, and if you are a data center, there is no way you can not comply with GDPR, right? Because you and if like even it's like if you are dealing only with Indians and Indian companies, then maybe because IT Act as of now does not have that level. But even DPDP Act once it comes in, but again DPDP Act does not talk about data processors obligation. They're talking about data fiduciaries obligation, and we are not data fiduciary in that sense.
You are a processor.
We are a processor in the in that sense. So we'll have to see again. The act is there, but the rules are still awaited, and then how it plays out, because you were in. You were earlier with telecom, and I'm sure you'll remember that 50 crore penalty which was there.
Yes, I definitely remember.
Was kind of pushed down the throat, right? So maybe something on those lines might come, right? So we never know in terms of where it is going. But I think it is, I think it's fair to say that data center in India will have that level of security, and all of them most likely will have the ISO certifications. So because that is the bare minimum requirement that your clients will expect you to.
Of course.
Or in today's day and time, more than the regulatory aspect, more than the GDPR. So GDPR has a because of the penalty, huge implication. But even somebody who is not in Europe and say working only with Indian and US client, and GDPR is not applicable. Even then, because of the impact that will have on your reputation.
That's the thing. The reputational risk, I think, is a big motivator for any data center to implement top-notch security measures. One connected question, Jayant. Because obviously the nature of business is such, there are a lot of third-party interface who are it could be a vendor, it could be supplier, it could be your agent, whatever you have. So how do you, what would be the right strategy to deal with that risk? Because the third-party risk is also a big thing.
Yeah, of course. So that's the part of the ecosystem, right? And when you are talking about data security, you are talking about data security as a whole. And you just need one slippage,
stray element somewhere.
So from that standpoint, it's more from the ecosystem standpoint. You'll have to work on those.
Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. So I think, Jayant, this has been very useful, because I wanted to touch upon the DPDP, but you have already spoken about GDPR. Unless you want to add something on the DPDP aspect specifically.
Yeah, so I think DPDP. So there are two things. One is specifically, if we look at it, an initial discussion about the data localization bit, right? So had it been there, it surely would have been better. As a if there is a data localization requirement, then there is no option but to have to stay here.
Yes.
Right now, if it is not there, then and because these are all these data centers are global data centers in that sense, right? So then you are kind of competing with the whole world in that sense, right? Because technically, whether and that is what was happening, say, a few years back, right? That data was not residing in India. Data was in Singapore or some other country. And then as and when you need it, you will be able to kind of get through from that, right? And because of the regulatory requirement, it came to India.
Yeah, it's not technological. The push was regulatory. Yeah.
Now, if we don't have the data localization requirement, which I'm not saying that it is not there. If you look at the act, it does talk about industry-specific data localization requirement being still applicable.
Sure.
And we'll have to see in terms of, and then there is also talk about not allowing certain countries. So we don't know what those certain countries are.
Right.
And without knowing, it's just a. It may not make sense to kind of make any comment, but so I think one is the data localization in terms of how eventually it plays out. So that is one. The other thing is your certain. That's again a pretty good example, right? So certain the 6 hour requirement which is there in cert, right? Where you need to, and that expectation is not just from the fiduciary. Or the data owner, right? From everyone concerned. So again,
then you also get covered effectively.
Yeah. So I'm saying it all depends in terms of where how, because if there is a requirement, because worldwide there is no need for say 6 hours, right? And if you only have 6 hour requirement in India, maybe it's easier to kind of I don't know, like, so that is one element. But again, as I said, I think there is a advantage also that India has, right? So over a period of time, we have this infrastructure. It was one thing not to have that infrastructure, which was the case earlier, and quite another when you already have this infrastructure where you have players who have put in their money. So I'm sure, and India is doing fairly well, and and there is a discussion in terms of going to edge, right? So,
Right.
and going to edge effectively means that you have smaller and smaller data center closer to the user, right?
Closer to the user.
So
I was.
you have in the tier 2, tier 3 cities also, they're planning to do data center. So from that standpoint, India with the population, India being the market that it is, so I'm saying, taking all that into account, and considering that you have this capacity, I think the impact that it will now have, even if data localization is not there, may not be as much as it was previously. But yeah, we may have to wait and see what eventually comes up.
So, this point about the edge. So, you think that edge is, I won't say future, but edge is certainly going to happen more and more?
Yeah, so I think Edge has been there for very long,
Correct,
fairly
that is
long.
there,
So
but
so yeah,
the growth.
so Edge, like the thing is, what is Edge? Earlier,
Hmm.
India was Edge. So if you look at
Yeah.
it, technically, or
Right, right,
in
right.
that sense,
Huh.
at one point of time, India was Edge, right?
Correct.
Because your core was somewhere else, then
But
you
this is
become
the
Edge.
edge. But
So
now
now you are core. So then
you further go down
go down
this.
that. So that, I
Yeah.
think, is a, see, I think because of the business, right? Say, like, if there is so much of transaction happening through online, right? Whether it is any of those payment gateway ecosystem, right? If so much of transaction is happening, then obviously you will, say, many a times, if you go in a very remote location, you may find a little more trouble, right?
Correct.
So if there is edge, like data
There
centers,
in that
your
sector.
your kind of response time will become better.
Sure.
Like, you will not have buffering even if you are watching, say, a series, in
Some remote
some
area.
remote area, all that might come in.
Change. Sure, we can certainly go on and on, Jayant, because it's a very, very interesting topic, but I think we have to put a stop somewhere. So, thank you. Thanks for your time today, and this was very, very interesting, and not just interesting. I think we learned a lot about how the industry is thinking. Particularly, I think the big takeaways from this discussion was that the Indian story of data center is a bright story, bright spot, and it's just going to get brighter, bigger, and more prominent in days to come. And the industry is cognizant of its responsibility. That's where Jayant mentioned about the ambitious plan of becoming 100% reliant on renewable energy in the coming days, which is very heartening to know. So, with that, we will conclude the session. Thank you for watching this, and do let us know in case anyone has any question. Thank you, and have a good day.